Okay, with that door closing and the noise coming down, I think it's our cue. Thank you for joining us for this breakout session. My name is Matthew Landkamer. I'm with Whereabout, a destination strategy firm based in the United States. We're here today to talk about dropping the, I think I'm the second person to drop one of these during to climate resilience, disasters, and sustainable recovery. And I had a delightful breakfast with my panelists this morning talking about disasters. Turns out we all really like to talk about disasters we've lived through. So there's going to be a lot of that in this session. This is a topic that I'm personally super interested in, so I'm really happy to be given the chance to moderate this panel. What we're going to talk about is disaster risk management, climate adaptation strategies, and the critical role of local communities and tourism stakeholders in recovery efforts. That's the promise of this panel. I think of this as much bigger and longer term and more complicated than just disaster preparedness or crisis planning. This is about thinking systemically about a destination and how it can weather shocks. So the definition I use of destination resilience is one that's capable of maintaining a viable visitor economy in the face of periodic unexpected shocks. And those shocks can be environmental. We're going to hear a lot about that today. They can be economic. A simple recession can be a shock to a destination. And they can be social. I mentioned I'm from the United States. I think we're living through one of those right now. So there's a lot of levers that we can use to support the resilience of a destination. And our panel today brings perspectives from risk analysis, disaster recovery, hospitality innovation, and leveraging tourism to support localized active conservation. So we're going to share some case studies highlighting successful recovery initiatives, things that restore ecosystems, protect livelihoods, and foster long-term resilience. I'm going to introduce each panelist before they speak, and then, of course, we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A and Slido. So our first speaker today is James Daniell. He's the CEO of Risklayer, a company that builds risk and resilience data models and software, such as Hotel Resilient for hotels, tourism destinations, NGOs, governments, and the insurance industry. For the past 20 years, James has bridged the government, industry, and academic spheres in engineering, climate, and disaster space through his lead roles at the Risklayer, the World Bank, and multiple universities. Join me in welcoming James Daniell.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Buddha, everyone, and Ninjamarni. So I'm from Ghana, so that's Adelaide, and local knowledge is really, really important. Essentially, disasters affect individuals, families, and then my goal through life is to sum that all up. And essentially, through summing that up, you learn a lot about the way that that there's different scales that are needed for disasters, for climate change, and that different metrics are needed as well. So not just economic, but also environmental, social, and so forth. From birth, I was born into a disaster family. So my dad was a flood engineer, mum was a historian, and essentially every single holiday for us was going around and measuring floods around Australia in the outback. And we used to camp out, and yeah, so my sister and I, by the age of 10, we knew more about water engineering than most people with a degree on it. And yeah, so that sort of has really gone through my life. And since then, I suppose every single disaster, I've always been interested in the people, also the effects of it, and we try and bring this in different ways. So, who last week was affected by the tsunami? Did anybody need to evacuate at all? Was anybody on the coast at the time? So, yep. So here in the Pacific, of course, there was a massive tsunami last week in Kamchatka, so in Russia. And right across the Pacific, there are evacuation orders. So hotels were affected where people had to get off the beach. There could have been currents and things like this. Part of my role in a different sphere is to do the assessment for this. So the economic assessment I do for the World Bank, and then this has rapid payouts. But the models we use, the tools, and the data sets we use, they are applicable as well before the disaster. And so this is what we do within Risklayer, is that we try and create assessments, we try and create data products that can use this to then help problems in the tourism industry as well as other industries as well. So just as an instance, before the tsunami, we'd done a global risk study in 4 tsunamis where we looked at 10,000 tourism destinations. We looked at every tsunami that can occur through using different methods, and we can assess for each of the different destinations the economic impact. But what I've learned, this is my first GSTC, and what I've learned is that the metrics that we need to use are not always economic. We also do a lot of environmental assessment in terms of coral reefs. So what is sort of the critical success factor that you really need to count? Is it the percentage of mangroves? We just saw a video where, of course, Hurricane Dorian 2019 in Bahamas, that knocked out about 20% of the mangroves. Now, those mangroves are really, really important as well for waves. But what about for hotels in the Pacific? The number of evacuations that you need to go through per year would be a useful metric for you. So we can calculate this. So we can do this through tsunamis, through storm surges, through storms, cyclones, and various other shocks that can occur to show the different impact metrics. This is what we do at Risklayer. So our focus areas at Risklayer, and we work with a lot of governments around the place, but also with destinations, as well as in the insurance and financial industry, as well as with tour operators and destination management companies. We create data sets for hazard exposure vulnerability, and we do global destination climate risk modeling, but we count from the ground up. So we use local data because local is best. Use always the local language. Local language is important. And then we also do some destination resilience strategic planning and also resilience assessments and dashboards. So I don't want you to read into this too much, but what we start off with is actually the metric at the end. And then we work our way back as to how to actually count it. So essentially we have a lot of different critical success factors, we call them, where essentially we will pick a certain issue. So it may be, let's say, biodiversity, and then there'll be a certain metric that we want to calculate. You know, essentially how many species are in a certain zone in a coral reef. And then we will work out a way to model it. So to work out how we can, for different shocks, so different climatic shocks and also with climate change, essentially to work out the numbers and what is that metric and the change in that metric. But not everything you can do quantitatively. So I love numbers, as you can probably tell, but there's a lot of things that you need to have expert elicitation and ground-based qualitative metrics. And so that's where we use scorecards. And so we sit down generally and start off and work through these things. So this is something that we do with Visit California just recently, and there's a dashboard associated with it. So this is the California dashboard, and a lot of sort of different metrics are done. We have this, the really sort of the climate change metrics, the disaster metrics. So how often are you going to be hit by an earthquake? What is the annual average loss? So how much do you expect to lose annually from an earthquake? But then we also bring in a lot more of the softer metrics which are important to the tourism industry as well. Where is employment changing with different shocks and these types of metrics? And so we sort of put this together along the way. So we have a few different tools that we use, and one of them is also hotel resilient, where for any hotel in the globe you can work out essentially what your risks are. So it's really from that climate and disaster risk lens. And we've had some great champions like Jakarta and EXO and Kiri and quite a few other groups where hotels then can come onto the platform, and then they can firstly work out, are we sustainable in terms of disasters and climate. Now, we also create a lot of databases, and what I've noticed also being here at GSTC for the first time, usually I'm not in tourism conferences, so I'm generally in big government conferences and many other fields. But there's a lot of data that we have, which I think is very useful, but also that it's also been great finding out what metrics are useful as well and what metrics can we do a lot more with. So we have global hotel databases, but previously we've also created subnational destination level GDP per capita in different fields, accommodation, hotels night spent, and many other different metrics. We have beach databases, biodiversity databases, and many other different databases globally. Yeah, it's been interesting just having a lot of chats with people and working out, what are the different synergies and how can we support as well. I'm just going to take you now through 3 different projects that we've done along the way. So one of them is the Wine Region Risk Index. So across the globe, wine is a huge industry. 300 billion a year is directly through the wine industry. But a lot more of that is then with essentially the tourism associated with those wine regions. And over 143 countries produce wine. Some of them a lot more than others. So there are certain countries, like Chile and Moldova, essentially, where you can even get upwards of 4% of the GDP coming directly from wine, and then there's the associated tourism. But the wine industry has huge amounts of shocks that can occur to it. So hail, frost, earthquake. So hail and frost for the vines, but then for the earthquakes is for the structures. And a lot of wine regions are on zones which are risky. And so what we've done is we created this risk index, but then sort of pulling through different sort of tools along the way to then look at adaptation. This is hail and bushfire. But then we've really worked through and tried to get wine resilience going on. The other one is Destination Risk Scan. So this is a global initiative led by the Travel Foundation, and so we're donating our time and data sets to it. And this is the first of its kind sort of risk scan which evaluates physical and transition risks for destinations. Now there'll be a global sort of destination data set or risk scan as such, but there's also different pilot destinations. So Cook Islands is one, Canary Islands, Queenstown, and here we're putting these global risk models that we use, and then looking at then the destination level and then putting this together. So we're donating our risk modelling metrics and time on that, and this will inform COP30. The last one that I'd like to mention is that there's quite a lot of emphasis on sort of local scale, which is very, very important. But there's also, at the government level, there are certain mechanisms that we can use to improve disaster resilience in the tourism industry. And this is something that I did for COP29, so for the last COP. And this was looking at small island states and essentially a financial mechanism to guard against the worst shocks. So when you have really, really big events, often these islands, they'll be down for many, many weeks or even months or years. And essentially it's very, very difficult for them to have any form of funding apart from aid coming in during this time. But through using private-public partnerships, essentially we can set up risk pools. And of course there is PCRIT, which is a risk pool. That's just where different countries then offset their risk. So, the same event isn't going to hit Fiji and Tonga at the same time usually. And so that what you can do is you can offset the risk of Tonga against Fiji and Fiji against Tonga. And what we did was we calculated this all out across the globe for these 13 countries and worked out that we could set up a mechanism where you could put $10 million, and then essentially what that would do is it really helps at the end of the day to guard against these big losses. And so, this could also help then with the adaptive investment at the end of the day. So our main efforts so far have been in just data recovery, in data modeling and building sort of these data through software, scorecards and tools to sort of quantify the risk. And so through Hotel Resilient is one, but also through different projects that we've been doing within the tourism world. And we're hoping that these types of projects at different levels, at government level, at destination level, at hotel level, when we can sort of marry these together in different mechanisms, hopefully data can drive a better sort of analysis at the end of the day and help us become more sustainable. So thank you very much.
And just a reminder to use Slido for questions, as well as the AI platform for summarization, if you're so inclined. Haven't seen any questions come through in Slido yet, and I'm sure that presentation will generate some interesting ones. So please get them in there. Our next speaker, Geoff Hyde, is the Managing Director of Sustainable Tourism International Limited, STIL. His experience includes 35 years as a sustainable tourism development planner, completing in-country, longer-term project assignments in Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, and the Solomon Islands. Geoff is also a technical advisor, investment analyst, business consultant, specialist trainer, lecturer, and author. And he's our next speaker.
Fat Buller the marker. And I've become an expert on tourism disasters apparently, because I've lived through a few of them. There's one. Oh, sorry, there we go. Sorry, I'm a bit technically challenged here at the moment. Yeah, I just wanted to list, so we're talking usually about natural disasters, but there are also self-inflicted disasters, which I did want to mention. We'll talk about disaster. So, I arrived in Vanuatu after I funded through the New Zealand government. I'm actually an Australian, but I told them I was Kiwi. And so they funded my contract to go to Vanuatu, which was after their Category 5 cyclone Pam. When I started in Samoa in 1991, I was there for 2 months and we got hit by Cyclone Val, which was at that stage the largest cyclone, Category 5 cyclone in the Pacific. So my first job as a tourism advisor was actually evacuating tourists. And we had to negotiate with Air New Zealand to send in one of their large jumbo aircraft to put all the tourists on to get them out. Some of which had contracted typhoid already. So it was disaster upon disaster. Nevertheless, you can read the slide there. We have had, obviously the pandemic was a big one. Shortly afterwards we had Cyclone Harold, this is back in Vanuatu. We've had a lot of political instability you may have been reading about. We've had 5 governments in 5 years, nearly 6 years now, which has meant different ministers for tourism, and it's quite hard to get policies approved and changes made when you've got a different minister that you basically have to re-educate. So that's also, I shouldn't say it's a disaster, but it's a bit of a hiccup as we go through recovery plan after recovery plan. We had also 2 Cyclone 4, Category 4 cyclones, one in 2 consecutive days, which I've never experienced, or I have now. That was in March 2023. We also had the national carrier Vanuatu go into liquidation, which we basically brought in strategists to avoid this, but we couldn't avoid it. I won't go into those details, but that hasn't helped. In a strange way, we have had increased loading capacity because the foreign airlines have picked up the slack. They're pretty quick to get in there, but of course the money itself doesn't stay in Vanuatu. The airfares that are paid for. Then in December last year we had the earthquake, which was the first time I've experienced an earthquake, and I broke my leg in that earthquake as well. So anyway, I won't go into that. So VSTAT was the program that I was brought in to run. You can read through that or get the slides later on, but that was a recovery program because it followed Cyclone Pam, which was the year before. So we did introduce sustainable tourism policies and strategies. Paul Pio spoke yesterday in a session and mentioned those, which was good. I did counterpart training of local staff. I actually set up an office and recruited 6 Needham staff. We ran workshops, we had a national tourism forum. We introduced a sustainable tourism policy. This was back in 2016. We also set up an accreditation program. We had GSTC come over and we used their guidelines. So that was a first, and that was part of the product development. We also did provincial tourism planning. Vanuatu was, I didn't bring a map, but I was trying to explain to people where it was. It actually is made up of 83 islands, and they're divided into 6 provinces. So it does give you a lot of diversity, in particular compared to, Fiji also has over 300 islands and also is split into 15 provinces. I think these are things that people need to understand, particularly tourists who travel there that will get news about a destination. They think, if there's a cyclone or an earthquake or a flood or a fire in one island, that it covers the whole country. It normally doesn't really work that way. Tourism investment, we had a World Bank team come in and do a demand supply study, and we introduced sustainable tourism and climate change criteria to assess projects. This is all part of the, I think, recovery or good management or sustainable tourism management. And we also, there was about 25 different websites all selling different products about Vanuatu, which was very confusing in the consumer market. So we put it all into one website, which makes it a bit easier to follow. I mean, every other product, every other business can have their own website, but when you're selling a destination, it's better to have it on one website and link the strategy with the messaging and the branding, which is pretty important. It's not working. Sorry about this. Okay, so I won't, we got 3 minutes left. Sustainable tourism policy, we wrote up that's being implemented as we speak. That was followed by the strategy. That came during COVID. We were already writing it up, but we turned that strategy into sort of doubled as a recovery plan. So that, and you can see there what we concentrate on. Well-being through high value and low impact tourism, resilience through niche tourism, product development, diversification. We do have a good agri-tourism program that's now been run by an NGO called Regenerative Vanua. There are speakers on that topic in the program. And of course, sustainability through certification, investment criteria, and setting up Ni Vanuatu businesses, SMEs, where they can display their entrepreneurship. COVID, of course, brought a new challenge. It challenged us all, and we all had closed borders and no tourists. We did have a crisis and response recovery advisory committee. Importantly, that was made up of all the sectors, so we had public sector, private sector, and community sector, including NGOs, and obviously the Department of Health was involved, public health. We safeguarding health for citizens and visitors, re-establishing the international transport access, at least planning for that. Local business stimulus package. So these are the 3 programs essentially that we implemented. Safe business operations, getting all the business prepared for when tourists did come back, and all the COVID programs that you had to go through for your health and awareness, so that people working in the hospitality sector particularly, and at the airports and the taxi drivers and all the rest of those people that are involved, would know about the safety precautions and the health precautions. We did have a business support program, so people were able to apply and get grant money. We did a fairly sophisticated business survey. They had to have a tourism permit and a business licence, and they had to follow a sustainable tourism code. Most of them did that because they all needed the money. We also set up an agri-tourism support program, and we have 27 agri-tourism operators now in their own association, so that seemed to work as well. Tourism support from the Ministry of Tourism. We've just done and tourism does get involved in this, myself and other people in the tourism ministry and department and industry leaders. Come and talk to the climate change consultants and people that are implementing climate change policy, I should say. So there's a climate risk and vulnerability assessment that we update for them, our tourism sector updates for them. And of course, we're all involved in the National Adaptation Plan. So merging, well not so much merging, but tourism being part of climate change and climate change policy is essential. And we do feed into the climate change and disaster risk reduction policy. You can read through those, but the important, this slide just, I think, emphasises how tourism is everyone's business, and it gets, we're all on about, you know, loss and damage. You would have heard about Vanuatu getting the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. That was started off in Vanuatu. It wasn't just Nigan students, it was Solomon Islands and Fijians and a few others, a group of about 25 of them all studying law over at the Emmaus campus in Vanuatu. But we've now got a loss and damage fund, and we've got people that are going to contribute to that. Insurance costs are prohibitive, but we're having a national government guarantor look at that. Reducing pollution and waste management is ongoing. Energy and water conservation are extremely important and becoming ever so more important. Infrastructure damage and access. One of the disasters was after Cyclone Pam, the main runway in Bowerfield, Port Villa, wasn't maintained, and the cracks opened up, and Air New Zealand, for one, pulled out, used it as a good excuse to pull out of a non-economic sector for them. And we couldn't get, even though I was funded through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in New Zealand, we couldn't convince them, they were also a shareholder in Air New Zealand, we couldn't convince them to bring the airline back. Nevertheless, we do have other airlines that fly in from New Zealand. Coastal erosion is starting to happen, which does affect, well, livelihoods more than anything, but also tourism assets. We do have marine protected areas. That's really to protect overfishing, but also, I think Daniell was raising the concern about the Great Barrier Reef. All reefs are now starting to get coral bleaching, so we do need to protect them more. And of course, coral reefs are also part of the diving product. Evidence-based sea level rise. There's a lot of people in Vanuatu who don't believe that's happening, but it is happening. I think Daniell will get his data on that. Food security, we're pushing you eat local food as much as you can, particularly if you're tourists. And we did have a discussion at breakfast this morning about, you know, is tourism that uses fuel emissions, like aeroplanes and cruise ships, should we be promoting that, or should we be perhaps promoting a yachting product or an expedition ship product that has, you know, biofuels? They're the three programs that tourism's involved in terms of climate change. The VanCuret, which is Vanuatu Climate Information, so they do collect data for your information. And things like flood management are very useful, weather systems, monitoring, all those that tourism industry people can also be involved in and collect or make use of that data. Renewable energies, a lot of solar panels going in now with storage batteries, which is important. And the Vanuatu community-based climate resilience, so they're setting up through the Ministry of Climate Change mainly local committees and village committees to look at the climate change issue. So it's an awareness building, it's information gathering, and it's the local people implementing their own programs, and of course they're more than happy to share that with tourists when they visit the villages. I think I'll leave it there. Oh, well, no. One more. That slide sort of encapsulates it all. The critical factors. Having all sectors working together, it was funny how not so much the cyclones or the earthquake, it was only sort of centred in Port Vila, but the pandemic brought every sector together. They all helped and worked together. My 3 C's are coordination, cooperation and communication, and that certainly proved the point with COVID-19 pandemic. So that was some value. Government-sponsored business support programs, you've got to have funding, otherwise the businesses go out of business and you've got less product and a collapsing tourism industry. Infrastructure always needs aid money, so that's coming in. And you've got to link tourism with climate change programs, as I've said previously in the previous slide. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Geoff. Given your track record of being present when disasters strike, I have to admit, I'm a little nervous being on stage with you. Our next speaker is Grace Hu. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Dossen Group, one of China's largest hotel groups. She also serves as Deputy Director of the Sustainability and ESG Promotion Center at the China Hospitality Association, leading the revision of national green hotel standards and driving ESG innovation across China's hospitality industry. Let me welcome Grace.
Hello everyone, I'm Grace from China, and I serve as Chief Sustainability Officer in Dossen Group. And according to the latest rank, I think the Dossen Group, this one? Test, okay. So Dossen Group nowadays is the world top 15th, I think, and in China is top 5. So I'm here, and I also serve as Deputy Director for China Hospitality Association. So China Hospitality Association is taking care for all the hotels in China. That's at least 320,000, except all the Airbnb type. So that's my job. And here nowadays, I mean, within the 2 days meetings, each time I saw the map, global map on the screen, I saw very little few spots on China. I think that's why I'm here, and together with lots of friends, even friends from Taiwan, we come here is want to be the bridge to combine the global partnership. And today I'm honored to share some how China hospitality industry is navigating climate risk and building resilience through national framework, innovation, practice, and public and private sector cooperation. Oh, okay. So nowadays, I think climate extremes are no longer the real event. It becomes in our reality. So please keep me safe, because this map is just a concept map for China, okay? It's not with the lines for China border. I don't want to be involved in some political issues. Okay, thank you. So, as you can see, only in the last year, 2024, China, we saw like 42 very heavy storms and at least 9 typhoons. It's Shanghainese. I'm born in Shanghai. Shanghai is like, we have a mystery story. Like Shanghai never suffered from typhoon, but last year, I told you, I saw what's the deadline for the world. That's amazing, only 1 hour, but we all thought that we're gonna be dying. So, and meanwhile, we historical heat waves every year almost. That's only the number of last year. So I think these examples like flows in Guangdong forces hotel evacuations, and meanwhile, while high temperatures spiked energy use. So our industry must now plan not just for energy saving or sustainability, we need to focus on the climate resilience. Oh, this do have problems. Okay, so this is, I want to give you a broad idea, so what China's doing right now. So from the national-wide 30-60 goals, the goals pushing all the sectors, including the hospitality, to transform. And this is make low-carbon roadmaps are being developed, and ESG regulations are reshaping the investment decisions. And meanwhile, for national campaigns and other events that are inspiring public behavior for change. So for hotel, this means aligning with this wider national framework, meanwhile to contributing to the both emission reductions and the guest awareness. So let's see, in China Hospitality Association, we are now updating the national green hotel standards. So as project lead for this, I've overseen the integration of climate adaptation, recovery planning, and aligned with some frameworks like GSTC. That's I worked very closely with Mihi and GSTC team, trying to align and recognize from both sides. And the certifications, I believe, is no longer become the only focus on the energy saving, but it's all about our future readiness. And we did lots of workshops, campaigns, and policy engagement. I think we are mobilizing the industry to responsible holistically. And then for the group I worked for Dossen group, I created Net Zero Voyage from the last year. And we try to translate strategy into action across 2,070 hotels with a roadmap, very clear one. So from AI-powered energy management to modular renovations, we're embedding resilience into all the phases. That's means from design, construction, and operation. So a recent example is in the areas, maybe some of you noticed, even in the Mongolia, facing the floods every day, and Beijing got alarms for heavy rains. So for the traditional rain area like Guangdong, we just standardized the storm-resistant materials and upgraded our emergency backup system. Meanwhile, I believe that resilience doesn't stop at the hotel wall. We are building strong localized supply chain by sourcing locally, auditing suppliers under ESG standards, and using digital traceability tools to make every number is visible and traceable. So I want to bring this to you is compare with or besides with the traditional way we are managing the supply chain, we are seeing more innovative partnerships. We work with some startups like Into Orbit's Zero Carbon, I listed here, to make our or to seek for a very pioneering circular economy supply chains in our hotels. So through from recovering demolition waste for circular reuse to digital integrated material and the carbon data across hotel life cycle, and the building networks with recyclers and producers, we are creating a closed loop ecosystem that turns waste into value. And meanwhile, we believe that we also put our climate response means engaging with our local community. So we integrate our local heritage into our guest experience, support community projects, and collaborate with local government and the schools. This relationship aren't just nice to have. So when you respond to the disasters, that ensure you have a collaborative, more resilient cooperation. So my key, I want to just summarize it very quickly. So for me, resilient is not a single word. It contains, it's like the total total things with the infrastructure, governance, culture, and the partnership. So it's not just about stronger buildings. It's about proactive leadership, inclusive strategies, and the community roots, and also what I'm here, global partnership. No one is left behind. So I truly believe hospitality can lead this transformation. Imagine those hotels like where we are for here, at least it's the media posted, right? And we can advertise something. So yes, I catch up the time. I am so noticed on this. So thank you everyone for listening on this. I can't go to very detail because the time is very limited, but I'm always open for exchanging ideas and knowledge exchange, those kind of things. And feel free to touch me on the LinkedIn or email me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. We have one more speaker before we go to Q&A. Taukeinikoro, if I'm close, I hope, holds a BA in Business Management from the School of Business Management, University of the South Pacific in Fiji. And his company, Rivers Fiji, offers tours along the upper Navua River, which flows through a tropical canyon in Fiji, often called the Highway to Our Ancestors. This public-private conservation tourism area focuses on sustainable tourism and creates economic opportunities for local communities.
Don't worry, as you hear, I'm from Rivers Fiji. I'm not going to show you another slide of Rivers Fiji. I think by now many of you have seen pictures and mansions and even a video of Rivers Fiji. You know, we were strictly told no marketing in our speeches. But I think they just did it for me, and I'll take it. Anyway, Bulovnak and warm greetings to you all. I would like to begin by acknowledging the organizers of this forum and my fellow panelists who have shared their valuable insights today. It is a great honor to be part of this important discussion on climate resilience, disasters, and sustainable recovery. I speak to you today not only as a representative of Rivers Fiji, but a member of a community that has felt the very real consequences of climate disruptions and global crisis, and found ways through partnership and perseverance to rise again. Fiji, like many island nations, stand at the forefront of climate change. Our beauty, our rivers, our coasts also makes us vulnerable. Storms are getting stronger. Floods are more frequent. Ecosystems that sustained us for generations are now under threat. At Rivers Fiji, we operate in one of the most environmentally sensitive and cultural significance areas, the Upper Navua Conservation Area, a Ramsar site. This is just a business location. This is not just a business location. It's ancestral land. It's sacred river. It's community. When disaster strikes, be it a Category 5 cyclone or public health crisis, the impact ripples not only through operations, but through the lives of the people we work with, support, and serve. Let me take you back to the aftermath of one of the most severe storms to impact our region, when river system that sustains both our environment and our livelihoods are overwhelmed. Torrents of floodwaters carried debris that choked the waterways. Trails and bridges were destroyed. River access was completely cut off. Our infrastructure, boats, platforms and walkways suffered extensive damage. But beyond the impact on our operations, the storm severed connections between communities, isolating many in remote and vulnerable areas. What was once a corridor for adventure and ecosystem was suddenly transformed into critical emergency route. And in that moment, the purpose of our work fundamentally shifted. Rivers Fiji ceased to be solely a tourism enterprise. We became an integral part of the emergency response. During severe storms and cyclones, our operations moved into standby mode to assist local authorities and emergency services, leveraging our expertise in navigating fast-moving floodwaters. Our trained rafting and kayaking personnel, certified in whitewater rescue, worked hand in hand with first responders to reach those who are in need. Our four-wheel drive buses, typically used for tourist transfers, are repurposed to access hard-to-reach inland communities, transporting residents to evacuation centers and rescue hubs. As we moved from response to recovery, our focus remained on people, not on profit. Our vehicles carried not tourists, but essential supplies, food, tools, and medical equipment. Our guides, deeply familiar with the terrain and local customs, became critical liaisons, ensuring that isolated villages were supported, informed, and safely reconnected. This experience offered a profound realization: the tools and infrastructure of tourism can and must serve a dual purpose. In times of crisis, they become instruments of resilience. Rivers Fiji has shown that a tourism operation, when grounded in community and compassion, can become a lifeline in the truest sense. Our commitment goes far beyond providing river journey. It is about standing with our communities, restoring connections, navigating the path to recovery together. Mahatma Gandhi once said, and I quote, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." While the storm comes and goes, the COVID-19 pandemic was an enduring crisis. Rivers Fiji shut down for nearly 2 years. Like many other organizations, our revenue stopped, our office closed, no bookings, no income. But the crisis also revealed the true essence of who we are, not just a business, but a family, a vanua, a community. Through Nova Sustainable Tourism Collective, we were supported by the American and British embassies. Rivers Fiji took a new role. We became a frontline service provider, not in tourism, but in public health. We transported doctors to the remote highlands of Navosar villages that had no proper road access, received medical care. In some places, our four-wheel drive buses were the only way in and out. Let me be honest, this came at a great personal cost as we isolated ourselves from family. My wife and I have to live with fear that many exposure might endanger our loved ones. But when you see a grandmother received her first COVID injection or an infant get checked by a doctor for the first time in your life during this pandemic, you realize it was worth it. During the worst of the crisis, the thought that kept me going was this: one day our staff will return. One day the river will be filled again with laughter and awe, with new stories. And when that day comes, I want to be ready to welcome them back. And not just to a job, but to a purpose. We kept the promise. We were open. We didn't just start operations, we assessed, reassessed everything. And now we used our resources to how we train our staff, to how we build back in a way that was once more resilient than before. As a quote saying, we are not only rebuilding the world we lost, we are building the world we want. It's an anonymous one. One key pivotal for Rivers Fiji was shift to the local market. With international tourism halted, we ask ourselves, what can we offer our own people? We kept promoting river expeditions, environmental educations to Fijians. For many of our own citizens, this was their first real encounter with a conservation area. School trips, family excursions, teacher, workshops, a river became a classroom. This helped us sustain operation. Yes, but more importantly, it reinforced our belief that tourism must benefit our local communities first. Climate resilience isn't just about physical infrastructure. It is about culture, ownership, shared and stewardship. Our experience has taught us sustainable recovery requires more than just rebuilding what was lost. It demands remaining what is possible. We further reduce our ecological footprint and rebuild and be resilient. We committed to near zero waste principles on all our expeditions. We enhanced safety protocols, not just for tourists, but for all staff, health and mental well-being. Every step of the way we worked with local landowners, the 9 Matangali that make up our land owning partners. We are not just stakeholders. They are not just stakeholders. They are co-creators of our mission. Their resilience is our foundation. None of what I've shared would have been possible without the partners. The support from the diplomatic missions, the Ministry of Health, community leaders, and even fellow tourism operators like the members of the Ndovata Sustainable Tourism Collective was invaluable. We must move away from idea of competitors and start thinking in terms of collaborators, especially in times of trouble. Climate change is no longer a future threat. It is our lived reality. The question is not whether disaster will happen, but how prepared we are to respond. And whether our response can also build a better and fairer and more sustainable future. Rivers Fiji's journey through storms, through flood, through pandemic is a story of pain, but also of perseverance. It is a story of adaptation and resilience. And it is a story is still being written. It is the story of a journey and not of a destination. We hope our story reminds others, especially those in tourism, that we are more than service providers. We are the steward of ecosystems. We are allies of our communities. And when the worst comes, we can be first responders too. Let us build tourism industry not only designed to endure disaster, but to heal, restore, and uplift. I'll end with this quote by Albert Einstein, that elegantly encapsulates the essence of our journey, transforming storms into stars, pandemic into purpose, and leaders and hardships into hope. Quote, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. Unquote. Let us seize this opportunity, not just to rebuild, but to reimagine, to reconnect, and rise together. Vinak.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you to all the panelists. We've got 20 minutes for good conversation, so keep the questions coming on Slido. I'm going to start with this one. And I would like, what's that? Anonymous, yeah, lots of anonymous. I'm going to start with this one, and I think maybe James and Cassie, if you could dialogue about this one, at least at first. How can tourism partners be included in disaster recovery plans that have already been made without their input? There's an assumption there that they're not included, but say they are. How can you then bring people in?
Yeah, so through my experience, what I've seen so far, in disaster recovery plans, essentially the Ministry of Tourism is often involved, but in a very small amount. It depends on the country. And essentially tourism partners, so they should be involved a lot more. What I've seen from my perspective, the World Bank has a conference called Understanding Risk. It's every 2 years, and there we have ministries. We look at a lot of these different processes, so building disaster recovery plans, for instance, and how this is done in different countries along the way. We don't have huge amounts of tourism input there, and there should be a lot more. In the disaster recovery process, what we've seen quite often is the Ministry of Tourism, depending on the strength of the tourism GDP, will have a bigger seat at the table in the process, but politics changes, and depending on when the disaster occurs, it could be a very new minister who isn't integrated with the rest of it. And so I think, one, we're missing the idea that politics changes and that there's a 3-year life cycle quite often on politicians and ministries, and even less so on a cohesive government. And the second one is that we don't include tour operators, we don't include academics, we don't include GSTC in this process. And yeah, hopefully this can be done in the future.
Cassie, I'm curious, as a local tourism partner, we got pulled into recovery efforts, and I assume that wasn't planned ahead of time. How could that happen really well in the future?
Yes, speaking from a small tourism operator, it depends on the individual tourism operators, how they want to engage. Because during disaster, there'd be very minimal contact from various stakeholders. So therefore, the onus is on us to respond quickly, because the timing is very slim. You're not given a chance to think a lot. So the onus is on the small operators to start to train their staff if they come across this kind of situation, and then to act. And hopefully others just will do the same.
If we have time, I want to come back to that dual purpose thing where part of our infrastructure can also be part of our recovery infrastructure. There's one, yeah, please, Adam.
Is that on? Right. In Vanuatu, we did have all sectors involved. We had three tourism associations. One's for hotels and resorts, one's for tour operators, and the other one that I'm a member of is called the Tourism Owners Association of Vanuatu, which does include 40% NEVAN businesses that are owned and operated by NEVAN operators, which is important. We've also got other whitefellas, as they call us, who are also involved, and there's also Chinese businesses and companies that are involved. And we also have the Chamber of Industry and Commerce involved. They represent the other sectors in the private sector, the other businesses. And we had public health, environment, climate change, you know, the usual government agencies, as well as at that stage Air Vanuatu. So it was a pretty big committee, but it all functioned quite well. And also I was saying, other people have raised the point that Cassie was saying, in times of crisis, people do band together and cooperate, communicate and coordinate. So I think that's one of the good things that came out of these disasters.
Okay, should we move on to another question? Tourism has the resources to play a vital role in disaster management. I think there's another assumption baked into that question. But I think we can think of resources in this case broader than financial resources. This may be connections, communication strategies, all sorts of resources, right? So if tourism has resources that can be used in disaster management, but most of the time it's not factored into the planning, who wants to take that? Yeah, Cassie, go ahead.
I guess from our side, how we started to introduce to doing this thing, because there was a fire station close to us. So we went to the fire station and told them, you know, if you need assistance in the whitewater rescue, we are here, we'll help you guys. We have rushed, we have trained personnel to help you cross the floods and all those. And that's how we started. And then we moved into the local governance. We were calling to the meetings, and that's how we started taking much room. And it was nothing planned, it was just us going forward and giving our assistance.
Yeah. That's all right. From my point of view, I mean, in the immediate recovery phase, or straight after disaster, hotels are extremely important. So often they're used for temporary accommodation. So you'll have your impacted zone, and then outside of that impacted zone, those hotels are used straight away for evacuation, essentially, and accommodation. There's lots of other ways that tourism is used, and Cassie, I think you brought up a lot of these in terms of buses used and things like this. But from what I've seen of 15 years of disasters straight after the events, tourism plays a major role, and it inherently does. So yeah, from my point of view, tourism is doing a lot in that post-disaster phase.
There was, sorry, I'm trying to find, there's a question about hotel that I wanted to. Yeah, I've got our room on my screen, but that was not our room. You're right. This one, so just to follow that last question, and I think, Grace, I'd love to hear your take on this. How do you get participation with hotels for these initiatives when they have so many other competing priorities and limited capacity?
Okay, that's
Especially when you talk about integrating into these disaster recovery.
Yeah. Always, I mean, compared with poverty, profit is always the priority for all the business, not only for the hotel industry, right? But I also saw, I can merge maybe two questions. Another question is like how to convince the boss who hotel managing maybe MD who never believe on sustainability, never believe on the climate risk, those kind of things. So I do met someone like this. My previous boss, not in the hospitality industry, but as in the pharmaceutical. So just imagine, pharmaceutical, compared with pharmaceutical industry, the profit is much, much more than what we got in the hospitality. So even in that profit, people, regardless of the sustainability things, because they want to earn more money. So my way is, I help them to make more money. So I try to find a win-win situation, that's the first. And if I really can't find it, maybe they so focused on the short-term things, I will list a long list for the disasters, for how resilient is important with numbers. These numbers could be quite giant because all the cases I use maybe is national data, you know. Then I will tell them why you need to do sustainability is actually not for your short-term, 1 year finance report. It's for your long-term. I'm your insurance in this company. I'm the only person who takes care as much as you. I can even understand what our lawyers schedule today. I do all the details by myself, not by my team members, not by juniors, not by interns. I do it all by myself. Then I make everything so convinced. So then I got the trust. Okay, Grace can help me to make money. So it's very sorry to say that, but somehow we need to respect their perspective as well. We need to understand why they regardless about sustainability, what they sacrifice. They feel if I believe in sustainability, maybe I need to lose my convenience. So my way is tell them, no, I will make your life better, longer, perfect. So that's my way. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, yeah. Anybody want to add on to that?
I was just going to say, hard numbers are quite often the thing that we've noticed in hotel resilience. So there's all these lovely processes that you can do with a hotel, but at the end of the day, actually presenting the number of, you're going to lose $1 million a year on average, and you're going to have a $10 million shock inside of this for your resort chain. That sells it a lot better generally.
Somehow I think a businessman can always understand the numbers. US dollars, perfect. RMB, okay. But if you ask them, sustainability is not something you need to learn. It's something about who you are. He will say bullshit. Always like that.
It's one more take, I suppose, on that exact point is what I've been seeing in GSTC. Translation into economic is always important. So even if you can translate, and there are ways of doing it, cultural, environmental impacts, so you can do cost of mangroves, you can do different costing out into the future. And this is obviously done, from what I've seen, not enough to convince Ministry of Finance, convince the big insurers and big banks essentially to invest in sustainability. So always getting that back into economic terms is often the thing. Of course, we as on the sustainability side, we can, of course, those other metrics are very, very important in terms of, number of species, in terms of biodiversity, but yeah, it needs to be then converted back into an economic term for people to really make change.
So I just want to follow up on that a little bit, because in my experience, those economic numbers don't always work with governments. And now this may be localized to where I'm from, but I can see why they would work very well for a hotel room. But has anybody else run into sort of needing to tell the story a different way to maybe elected leaders or that sort of thing? Where the hard economic numbers maybe don't play as well? Or maybe not.
Value on anything, really. I mean, there are companies around that go and do nature economics. They're very good at doing the same thing that James is doing, oddly. There's some questions there about community-based tourism, which is probably where we're heading. We certainly, like Fiji, like Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu is similar with they have chiefs that are head of the village communities, and you must, whenever you enter a village, you must get permission from a chief, and you teach tourists to do that. But obviously during, I think there's another question about how do you teach resilience. You don't have to teach resilience to Pacific Islanders. It's innate. They're born with the resilience. They're usually teaching us how to be resilient, because when we're either visitors there, foreigners, or we are in fact the tourists. And they're the people that you need to sort of look after initially. Most of the local communities do know how to, they all have a sort of recovery program or plan. The pandemic was indeed something, different and larger, and there was a lot of, as I said before, people helped each other, and they do this normally, naturally in Pacific Island cultures. So it's not as difficult as one might think.
Okay. I want to move on to the question at the top of the screen there, and it's it's posed to Cassie, but Geoff, I think you probably have some perspective given all the places you've lived in and worked. What strategies are in place to ensure that there are no exploitations to your sacred, insert the blank there, fill in the blank, sacred river ecosystems or other sacred places? So Cassie, if you'd answer first, and then I'm curious what others have seen.
Yeah, I guess it's when guests comes, we kind of give them talk first, you know, and also we let them be aware that this river is our primary office also. It's where people fish and get their fish from, you know, and it's like our office, it's like our home. So therefore we ask them to respect it just like they respect their own homes. They cannot be throwing rubbish inside, you know. They may have to make sure they take everything back. As the saying goes, leave nothing but only footprints. Do not take anything from the river. Just take good memories and pictures and leave. You know, those are the things that and we make sure we have a carrying capacity there, that we don't exceed, to minimize the impacts to the environment and to nature.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my perspective, straight after the events, the Ministry for Cultural Heritage in most countries will come in and at least say, you know, these zones are, you know, they shouldn't be changed in this way. But the reality of it is that when the government is tasked with rebuilding very fast, with changing, there's not a good enough database in most countries, depends on the country, of the zones which are important to local communities, that are important. And this is one disconnect that I've really seen in the post-disaster phase, is that a lot of our engineering, you know, things that we do straight after an event, we think we're shoring up, we'll build a dam, we'll do different things, we'll rebuild a culvert, and that can destroy essentially downstream a local community's, you know, sacred part. And yeah, and it comes back to data. So again, building up databases of which locations are things, what local communities are there, what are the values of those communities, and putting this in a spatial awareness straight after an event. You need that database there, because otherwise the point can take this into account. We can't have everybody at the table straight after the event.
Right. Geoff, Grace, any other thoughts on that one?
Well, you've got to start from the perspective of community. So it's building from the ground up. So we always consult with village communities to begin with in terms of strategic planning. And there's also a thing called, I started off, well, part of my journey involved working with Aboriginal communities in Australia, particularly in Arnhem Land. They were doing ecotourism before the word was even marketed once. They knew what they're doing is interpreting their culture, their nature, their society to people that want to learn about that. And it's the best form of tourism. And that ecotourism now, you know, it's all called all sorts of things, but it sort of all leads to sustainable tourism. We even have now regenerative tourism. I think I mentioned regenerative whenua. The word whenua is people, land, vegetation and food all being one, and not only that, the spiritual connection with those four elements. That's what the word Vanuatu, which comes from that term, which they seized upon on the first day of independence in 1980 when they kicked the French and the British out. We were called New Hebrides, which is islands in Scotland, for God's sake. Anyway, so remember that word whenua, and you'll hear much more about regenerative tourism, which is a deeper form of sustainable tourism. And you've all heard of ecotourism, responsible tourism, ethical tourism, etc. That's where you start from, I think, build up. But you must involve the local people, the local communities. No more top down.
Thanks for the experts besides me, I think you already touched everywhere. So I'm gonna maybe bring you some information from China. So when we do those kind of things from the very top, I mean from the government policy level, they already got some very clear standards to avoid any pollution or very little things. On the other hand, it's a very interesting, I think, maybe only in China, because we have a very super strong public transportation system. So when you be a destination, for example, even like Beijing, let's use the capital city, when you take the metro or public bus, you can hear all this guidance all the time in at least three languages: English, Chinese, or some local language, dialects. And meanwhile, because of the population in China, so we have volunteers everywhere. So if you go to the summer palace, you will meet people. Maybe you don't want to meet because he just come to you like, no, don't do that, clean it up. And then after, when the day off, we have a bunch of cleaners who will clean that up again. I just use these small examples to show you how China makes sure everything is properly and efficient. So every day is a new day. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are out of time. I know it's a little past 12:15. I think they gave us extra minutes because we started late. Thank you. Before we do our final thank you to the panelists, I am supposed to tell you that if you booked your airport transfer when completing your online profile, please take a moment to stop by the registration desk to reconfirm your departure date and pick up location. That means we're getting close to the end of the conference. So please join me in thanking this great panel.